In this video, I'd like to discuss three different functions that dependent clauses can have in a sentence. Now, we know that most of the time a dependent clause has a subject and a verb, and it's attached to an independent clause. It cannot stand by itself as a sentence, but it has to be attached to the rest of the sentence. So that's all good and well, but we might still like to know a little bit more in terms of what the dependent clause is contributing to the sentence. How is it functioning? And that's what this video is about. The first type of function is adjectival. Okay, we know that an adjective modifies a noun usually, and in this case, the dependent clause is also going to modify a noun in the main clause. Before we get there, let's just take this apart a little bit. So we have I took a maglev train. That's our independent clause. And then the second part, which runs on magnets, is our dependent clause. If we want to be more specific, we can say that the dependent clause is a relative clause. All right, relative clause. And that's because it starts with which here, which relates more information. And we've covered this in a separate video. Okay, if we want to zoom in further, then we can say that runs is the verb, and which, while it refers back, is also the subject of this new clause. And this last little bit on magnets is a prepositional phrase. Now, all of this last part, which runs on magnets, it's modifying train. Okay, so if we say what kind of train, then we answer the kind which runs on magnets. And then you can see that the dependent clause is acting like an adjective would. The second function is adverbial. Adverbs are obviously very tricky because they can do so many different things, but very often they modify the verb, and that's what we'll have a look at here. If we look at this sentence, it reads, while she took a nap, I studied for my math exam. The second part is the independent clause. It can stand by itself as a sentence. And the first part is the dependent clause. We have a subordinating conjunction here, while, which connects our dependent clause to the later part of the sentence. We also have a verb, she, right? Subject, she. We have a verb, took. And in this case, we have a direct object. Took what? A nap. Okay. Now let's think then about how this dependent clause relates to what comes later. And if we look at the verb here in the main clause, studied, and we say studied when, right? Then we say, well, while she took a nap. So the dependent clause is telling something about when the studying takes place. And in that sense, it modifies the verb and it's acting like an adverb. One more here, and this one is probably the trickiest. A dependent clause can also function like a noun. In this case, we have I will have what you are having, and this is all kind of run together, so it's a bit hard to see, but the first part of this, okay, actually we'll just underline the whole thing. Together this forms a clause. Okay, it's a bit hard to know how to separate it, but we have a subject in I, right? We have a verb in will, and then, will have, so that's the verb here, okay? And then if we say will have what, then all of this last part is the direct object. And you could think of something else. You can think of like, I will have a banana, let's say, I will have a banana. And you can see that that would function as a direct object. But if we zoom in, we can see that this thing that looks like kind of like a direct object and how it's functioning is also a clause in its own right. Because it has its own verb, our having, right? It has its own subject in you. And so we can see that this is actually kind of zooming in and providing more information in the form of a clause. And we can sum up then by saying that what you are having is kind of like a clause by itself, and it's functioning like a noun because a direct object is a noun or a noun phrase. So it's a bit like banana. I will have a banana, or I will have what you are having. And this is kind of rare to see. Well, it's actually not entirely rare, but it's surprising perhaps to see that a dependent clause can function a little bit like a noun. And that's it for the three different functions of dependent clauses.